Pruning thoughts and weeding circumstances, removing internal patterns and external obstacles that constrain natural flourishing. The master gardener understands that true compassion sometimes requires the sharp blade. Not all growth serves the plant's highest flourishing. Diseased branches drain vital energy from healthy development, while competing weeds steal nutrients from the roots. The art lies not in cutting ruthlessly, but in seeing clearly which patterns support authentic thriving and which, despite their familiarity, quietly undermine the very growth they appear to promise. In the gentle morning light of a master gardener's workshop, pruning shears rest in careful arrangement alongside a sturdy weeding tool, healing balm, and clean cloth for treating fresh cuts. These implements represent not destruction, but liberation, the skillful removal of what constrains natural flourishing so that inherent vitality can express itself fully. The experienced gardener approaches this dual work with both precision and reverence, understanding that each intervention must serve the plant's authentic development rather than merely conforming to external ideas about how growth should appear. Consider how the finest fruit trees require both annual pruning and regular weeding to produce their most abundant harvests. Internal pruning removes diseased or competing branches that drain energy from fruit production, while external weeding eliminates invasive plants that steal nutrients from the root system. Left unattended, trees develop dense tangles of problematic internal growth, while external competitors gradually strangle their access to soil resources. The untrained observer might see this maintenance as harsh interference, yet the master gardener recognizes that strategic removal enables the tree's truest expression. Your satisfaction operates according to these same principles of energy allocation and strategic obstacle removal. Mental patterns that once served protective functions may now drain vitality from your baseline contentment through internal habit loops that distort reality perception. Life circumstances that provided security during earlier phases might currently prevent the authentic development your soul is ready to express through external situations that systematically deplete available resources. Like branches that grow in unhelpful directions and weeds that compete for limited nutrients, these internal patterns and external circumstances require careful evaluation and, sometimes, compassionate removal. The art of psychological pruning and circumstantial weeding demands both the scientist's clarity and the healer's sensitivity. You must learn to distinguish between temporary discomfort that serves growth and chronic patterns that systematically undermine your natural capacity for flourishing. This discernment proves especially crucial because some of the most constraining internal patterns feel familiar and safe, while some of the most beneficial external changes initially feel uncertain or challenging. Most importantly, this dual work requires understanding both pruning and weeding as enhancement rather than diminishment. Each thought pattern you gently redirect and every structural circumstance you modify creates space for expressions of yourself that may have remained dormant for years. The goal involves not eliminating all challenge or difficulty, but removing the specific internal and external obstacles that prevent your natural resilience and contentment from operating at their full capacity. The internal garden, pruning mental patterns that constrain growth. Your internal landscape harbors thought patterns that function like the excessive or diseased growth a gardener must carefully prune to enable healthy development. These cognitive patterns often developed as adaptive responses to past circumstances, serving important protective functions during earlier life phases. However, what once provided necessary mental safety may now drain energy from your natural capacity for baseline satisfaction through habitual distortion of reality perception. Cognitive distortions represent the most common category of internal growth requiring pruning. These automatic thought patterns systematically distort your perception of reality in ways that undermine contentment, often operating so habitually that they feel like objective truth rather than learned interpretive habits. Unlike occasional negative thoughts that everyone experiences, cognitive distortions create persistent negative bias that prevents accurate assessment of actual circumstances while generating chronic stress that exhausts your system's resources. Catastrophizing emerges when your mind automatically amplifies potential negative outcomes while minimizing your capacity to handle challenges effectively. This pattern might have developed during periods when vigilance about worst-case scenarios provided important protection. yet it now creates chronic anxiety that prevents appreciation of ordinary positive experiences. Consider someone who receives constructive feedback at work and immediately imagines job loss, financial ruin, and relationship collapse rather than recognizing an opportunity for professional development. All or nothing thinking creates artificial extremes that eliminate the nuanced middle ground where most of life actually occurs. This cognitive pattern demands perfection or dismisses efforts as worthless, preventing the steady progress that characterizes sustainable development. Imagine someone who views a single day of imperfect eating as complete diet failure rather than one data point in a longer pattern of increasingly healthy choices. Mental filtering operates like a defective lens that captures problems while screening out positive information, creating a distorted view of reality that consistently underestimates available resources and overemphasizes difficulties. This pattern might manifest as focusing exclusively on the one critical comment in an otherwise positive performance review, or noticing only relationship friction while overlooking daily expressions of care and support. Personalization involves taking responsibility for outcomes beyond your actual influence while minimizing recognition of factors outside your control. This cognitive distortion creates exhausting responsibility for circumstances that involve multiple variables, preventing accurate assessment of your genuine sphere of influence. Consider someone who blames themselves entirely for their child's social difficulties at school without recognizing the complex factors including peer dynamics, teacher relationships, and developmental phases. Fortune-telling predicts negative outcomes without adequate evidence, often projecting past difficulties onto future possibilities in ways that prevent effective planning and present moment engagement. This pattern creates anxiety about imaginary problems while interfering with your capacity to respond effectively to actual circumstances as they develop. Mind reading assumes knowledge of others' thoughts and motivations without verification, often interpreting neutral or ambiguous behavior as evidence of criticism, rejection, or disapproval. This cognitive habit prevents authentic communication while creating relationship problems based on assumptions rather than reality. Labeling and global character judgments transform specific mistakes or limitations into sweeping identity pronouncements that extend far beyond actual evidence. Rather than recognizing, "I handled that situation poorly," this distortion creates, "I'm incompetent," or "I always mess things up." Such global labeling prevents learning from specific experiences while creating shame-based identity confusion that undermines future performance. Should statements create impossible standards through rigid thinking that demands reality conform to personal rules about how life ought to operate? These internal demands generate frustration, guilt, and resentment when circumstances don't match expectations, while preventing flexible adaptation to actual conditions. Consider someone who torments themselves with, "I should be more productive," rather than working with their natural energy rhythms. Emotional reasoning treats temporary feelings as reliable information about reality, assuming that emotional states accurately reflect objective circumstances. This pattern might manifest as, "I feel anxious, therefore something dangerous is happening," or "I feel hopeless, therefore my situation is hopeless," preventing recognition that emotions often reflect internal processing rather than external facts. Discounting the positive systematically dismisses accomplishments, compliments, or positive experiences as somehow not counting or being expected rather than meaningful. This pattern maintains negative self-concepts by explaining away contradictory evidence, preventing the accumulation of positive experiences that could naturally improve baseline satisfaction. Magnification and minimization operate like a distorted lens that inflates the significance of problems while shrinking the importance of resources, achievements, or positive circumstances. This cognitive pattern creates disproportionate emotional responses that prevent balanced assessment of life situations. Jumping to conclusions involves making definitive interpretations based on limited information, often combining elements of mind reading and fortune-telling to create assumptions that feel absolutely certain despite insufficient evidence. This pattern prevents information gathering that could lead to more accurate understanding. Control fallacies create either excessive responsibility for outcomes beyond reasonable influence or complete helplessness about circumstances within actual control. This distortion prevents realistic assessment of personal agency while generating either overwhelming pressure or paralyzing powerlessness. Fairness fallacy expects life to operate according to personal rules about justice and appropriate distribution of outcomes, creating persistent resentment when reality doesn't conform to these internal standards. This pattern prevents acceptance of circumstances that, while challenging, may not violate any actual principles of justice. Comparison and social ranking involve systematic measuring of personal worth against others' apparent achievements, advantages, or characteristics. This cognitive habit creates either superiority or inferiority feelings that prevent appreciation of your unique circumstance and development path while generating competitive rather than collaborative relationship approaches. Each of these distortions operates like competing growth that draws energy away from healthy development. Recognition represents the first step in internal pruning work, developing awareness of these patterns as learned habits rather than accurate perceptions of reality. The physiology of hypervigilance. When internal protection systems require pruning, beyond specific cognitive distortions lies a more comprehensive internal pattern that affects your entire nervous system's relationship with safety and threat detection. Hypervigilance develops when your internal threat detection systems remain chronically activated, scanning constantly for potential problems, even during objectively safe circumstances. This pattern often emerges from extended periods of actual threat or unpredictability, creating protective mechanisms that continue operating long after they're needed. Unlike healthy awareness that responds appropriately to actual circumstances, hypervigilance creates exhausting constant alertness that prevents the nervous system relaxation necessary for baseline satisfaction. Your body remains perpetually prepared for emergency response, allocating energy toward threat monitoring rather than the restoration and growth that enable natural contentment. Recognizing hypervigilance patterns. Hypervigilance manifests through characteristic physical and mental signatures that drain your system's resources. You might notice persistent muscle tension, especially in shoulders, jaw, or stomach, even during peaceful moments. Sleep becomes elusive as your mind continues scanning for problems that require monitoring. Your attention splits constantly between present activities and peripheral threat assessment, preventing full engagement with positive experiences. This internal hyperactivity functions like branches that grow frantically in all directions, creating dense tangles that block light and air circulation needed for healthy development. The original protective intention deserves respect, yet the pattern now constrains rather than supports your authentic flourishing. Socially, hypervigilance appears as excessive monitoring of others' facial expressions, tone of voice, or body language for signs of disapproval or danger. You might find yourself rehearsing potential conflicts, preparing defensive responses to criticism that hasn't occurred, or feeling responsible for managing everyone else's emotional states to prevent possible problems. Evidence-based approaches for hypervigilance. Pruning nervous system regulation research reveals that hypervigilance pruning requires approaches that directly address your autonomic nervous system's stuck patterns rather than relying solely on cognitive strategies. Dr. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory demonstrates that safety must be felt in your body before your mind can truly relax its vigilant stance. Somatic grounding techniques help interrupt hypervigilance cycles by redirecting attention from imaginary future threats to present moment physical safety. Practice deliberately noticing your feet on the ground, the support of your chair, or the temperature of air on your skin. These simple redirections activate your parasympathetic nervous system while providing concrete evidence of current safety that your threat detection system can recognize. Progressive nervous system regulation involves systematic training of your internal alarm system to distinguish between appropriate alertness and exhausting overmonitoring. Begin with brief periods of intentional relaxation, perhaps 5 minutes daily, during which you consciously soften muscle tension while maintaining awareness that you can quickly return to alertness if genuinely needed. The window of tolerance concept from trauma research provides practical framework for hypervigilance management. Notice when your nervous system operates within optimal arousal zones where you feel alert yet calm, versus periods of hyperarousal where vigilance becomes overwhelming. Develop specific practices that help return to your optimal zone when hypervigilance escalates. Breathwork for threat detection, recalibration, offers powerful hypervigilance, pruning through direct nervous system influence. Extended exhale breathing patterns signal safety to your vagus nerve, gradually retraining automatic threat detection responses. Practice breathing in for 4 counts, holding briefly, then exhaling for 6 to 8 counts while consciously releasing muscle tension. Cognitive reframing for safety assessment helps distinguish between appropriate caution and exhausting hypervigilance by developing more accurate threat evaluation. When your system signals danger, practice asking, what specific evidence supports this threat assessment? Am I responding to actual present circumstances or past experiences? What would appropriate caution look like without exhausting vigilance? Environmental safety anchors create external supports for internal nervous system regulation. Identify specific locations, objects, or activities that reliably help your system feel genuinely safe. This might include particular rooms in your home, certain music, specific physical positions, or relationship connections that consistently activate your relaxation response. Gradual exposure to non-vigilant states involves systematically building tolerance for moments when you're not actively monitoring for threats. Begin with very brief periods in genuinely safe environments where you consciously practice trusting that immediate vigilance isn't necessary. Gradually expanding these intervals as your nervous system learns that safety can exist without constant alertness. Remember that hypervigilance pruning progresses slowly as your nervous system learns to trust that safety can exist without exhausting constant monitoring. Celebrate small improvements in your capacity for present moment relaxation rather than expecting immediate transformation of long-established protective patterns. Pessimistic explanatory style. Pruning. Systematic interpretive bias. Dr. Martin Seligman's research on explanatory style identifies how systematic interpretative patterns create either resilience or vulnerability through the characteristic ways you explain both positive and negative events. Pessimistic explanatory style operates like an internal filter that consistently distorts incoming information to confirm negative expectations while discounting evidence that contradicts limiting worldviews. Permanence involves whether you interpret negative events as permanent fixtures versus temporary circumstances that can improve through time, effort, or changing conditions. Pessimistic permanence thinking creates hopelessness by viewing current problems as unchangeable realities rather than situations that naturally evolve. Pervasiveness concerns whether difficulties in one area contaminate your perception of all life domains versus remaining appropriately contained to specific circumstances. Pessimistic pervasiveness creates overwhelming despair by allowing single problems to overshadow multiple functioning areas of life. Personalization determines whether you assume primary responsibility for negative outcomes versus recognizing the multiple factors typically involved in complex situations. Pessimistic personalization creates shame and helplessness by overestimating personal responsibility while underestimating environmental influences. These 3 dimensions interact to create systematic negative interpretation of both success and failure that functions like diseased internal growth, requiring careful pruning. When positive events occur, pessimistic explanatory style minimizes their significance through temporary, specific, and external attributions. When negative events occur, the same style maximizes their impact through permanent, pervasive, and personal interpretations. Pruning pessimistic explanatory patterns involves developing more balanced interpretive habits that neither deny legitimate challenges nor systematically distort reality toward negative conclusions. This internal work creates space for accurate assessment that supports both appropriate concern and realistic optimism. The external garden, weeding circumstances that drain contentment. While internal pruning addresses thought patterns that distort reality perception, external weeding focuses on actual life circumstances that systematically drain energy from your baseline satisfaction, regardless of mental attitude adjustments. These external obstacles function like invasive plants that compete for limited resources, preventing your authentic development from receiving the environmental support necessary for healthy growth. Career and work environment challenges represent significant external weeds when professional circumstances systematically undermine rather than utilize your natural capabilities and interests. This includes work situations that consistently demand skills you lack while preventing expression of abilities you possess, workplace cultures that conflict with your values, or professional roles that provide insufficient meaning or appropriate compensation relative to energy expenditure. Consider someone whose accounting position requires detailed analysis yet provides no creative expression, whose natural teaching abilities remain unused, or whose values-driven approach conflicts with purely profit-focused company culture. These structural misalignments create persistent dissatisfaction that resists improvement through positive thinking or better work habits. Financial structure problems function as external weeds when economic circumstances prevent basic security or create systematic obstacles to authentic development through overwhelming debt, insufficient income relative to reasonable expenses, or financial obligations that consume all available resources for growth-oriented activities. These financial weeds differ from temporary economic challenges by creating systematic constraint that prevents flourishing regardless of financial management skills or spending discipline. Someone earning insufficient income for basic needs in their geographic area faces structural rather than personal financial obstacles. Geographic and climate misalignment creates external drainage when location significantly conflicts with your physical and psychological well-being through climate conditions that affect health, social isolation due to geographic distance from compatible community, or environmental factors that systematically undermine energy and satisfaction. Living situation dysfunction includes housing arrangements that prevent restoration and privacy, living partnerships that consistently drain energy through conflict or incompatibility, or household circumstances that create chronic stress rather than providing foundation for authentic development. Social and relationship structure challenges represent complex external weeds because they involve other people's needs and choices rather than circumstances completely within individual control. However, some relationship patterns do function as systematic drains on baseline satisfaction that require honest evaluation and potential modification. This includes ongoing relationship dynamics that consistently diminish rather than enhance both parties' well-being, family responsibilities that prevent any opportunity for individual development or restoration, or social isolation that provides no access to supportive connection despite genuine effort to build relationships. These external circumstances differ from internal patterns by existing independently of cognitive interpretation or emotional regulation. A genuinely toxic workplace culture creates actual stress, irregardless of mental resilience. Insufficient income generates real financial pressure independent of attitude toward money. Geographic isolation from compatible community provides actual social limitation that positive thinking cannot eliminate. Effective weeding requires distinguishing between external circumstances that can improve through personal effort and structural obstacles that require significant life changes for meaningful improvement. Some external problems respond to enhanced skills or different approaches, while others need complete environmental modification. The discernment of compassionate pruning and weeding. Effective internal pruning and external weeding require developing sophisticated discernment about which patterns and circumstances serve your authentic development versus those that constrain your natural capacity for flourishing. This assessment proves especially challenging because some of the most limiting internal patterns feel familiar and safe, while beneficial external changes often involve uncertainty and temporary discomfort. Internal pattern assessment begins with patient observation of your mental habits without immediate attempts to change them. Notice which thought patterns consistently enhance your energy and perspective versus those that reliably diminish your capacity for satisfaction and effective action. Cognitive distortions and pessimistic explanatory patterns typically create characteristic emotional signatures that serve as indicators of potentially constraining mental habits. Track your internal response patterns during various circumstances to identify which mental reactions serve skillful engagement with reality versus those that create unnecessary suffering or prevent effective problem solving. The goal involves distinguishing between appropriate concern that motivates helpful action and rumination that creates anxiety without generating useful solutions. External circumstance assessment requires honest evaluation of which major life circumstances currently support versus undermine your authentic development and baseline satisfaction. This includes systematic review of work environment, geographic location, living situation, financial structure, and relationship dynamics for their effects on your natural capacity for contentment. Identify life areas that consistently require excessive energy, expenditure, just to maintain acceptable functioning rather than supporting natural growth and satisfaction. Recognize circumstances where excellent self-care fails to create sustainable improvement, indicating possible structural misalignment requiring environmental modification. Consider energy allocation patterns across different life domains to reveal potential priorities for external weeding work. Which areas naturally enhance your vitality, and which systematically deplete resources needed for other important activities. This analysis guides strategic approaches to circumstantial improvement. Strategic planning for major life restructuring applies project management principles to significant changes that affect multiple domains simultaneously. Career transitions, geographic relocations, relationship modifications, or living situation changes often require careful preparation periods during which you build resources and develop alternative options before making major transitions. Begin with clear vision development about what structural arrangements would actually support your authentic flourishing rather than just eliminating current problems. Research practical requirements including financial implications, timeline considerations, and sequential steps that minimize risk while moving steadily toward better life alignment. Compassionate pattern and interruption and circumstance modification methods. Internal pruning requires approaches that honor the protective intentions underlying even problematic thoughts, while gently redirecting attention toward more accurate and helpful interpretive habits. Unlike harsh self-criticism that often strengthens the very patterns it attempts to eliminate, compassionate interruption works by providing better alternatives rather than forceful suppression. Mindful recognition without self-attack forms the foundation of internal pruning work. When you notice cognitive distortions or pessimistic explanatory patterns arising, begin with gentle acknowledgement. I notice I'm catastrophizing right now, or I'm using all or nothing thinking about this situation. This recognition prevents automatic engagement with distorted thoughts, while avoiding self-criticism that adds secondary suffering to primary challenges. Research in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy demonstrates that this gentle noticing creates space between you and your thoughts, preventing the automatic acceptance that makes distortions feel like absolute truth. Practice naming distortions as they arise without judgment, like a gardener identifying different types of overgrowth requiring attention. Curious investigation of protective functions involves exploring what positive intention might underlie problematic thought patterns. Catastrophizing often represents attempts to prepare for challenges and maintain control over unpredictable circumstances. Should statements may reflect desires for personal excellence and moral consistency. Understanding these positive intentions enables appreciation for your psyche's protective efforts while redirecting them toward more effective strategies. Dr. Kristen Neff's self-compassion research reveals that acknowledging the protective wisdom in problematic patterns reduces resistance while creating openness to healthier alternatives. Ask yourself, how might this thought pattern have served me in the past? What genuine need is it trying to meet? How can I meet that need more effectively now? Evidence examination through fair assessment applies scientific thinking to evaluate thought patterns for accuracy and helpfulness. When catastrophic predictions arise, systematically ask, what evidence supports this worst-case scenario? What evidence suggests alternative outcomes? How accurate have similar predictions proven in the past? This examination seeks balance rather than artificial optimism, recognizing legitimate concerns while preventing imagination from amplifying fears beyond realistic proportions. Strengthen this process by developing what researchers call balanced thinking, generating multiple possible outcomes including positive, neutral, and negative scenarios with realistic probability assessments. This approach trains your mind to consider fuller ranges of possibility rather than defaulting to worst-case assumptions. The stop technique for immediate pattern interruption provides a practical framework when distortions feel overwhelming. Stop what you're doing, take 3 conscious breaths, observe your current thoughts and feelings without judgment. Proceed with intention rather than automatic reaction. This method interrupts the neurological momentum that fuels distorted thinking while creating space for more balanced responses. Behavioral experiments for testing distorted predictions translate cognitive work into real-world evidence gathering. If mind reading suggests others disapprove of you, design small experiments to test these assumptions through direct communication or observation of actual responses. These experiments often reveal significant gaps between predicted and actual outcomes. Values-based redirection helps replace problematic patterns with meaningful alternatives aligned with your authentic priorities. When all-or-nothing thinking demands perfection, redirect attention toward your underlying values like learning, connection, or contribution that can be expressed through imperfect but sincere efforts. This approach provides positive direction rather than merely eliminating negative thoughts. External weeding approaches require different strategies that address actual circumstances rather than interpretive patterns. Problem-solving versus acceptance discernment helps distinguish between external situations requiring active change and those requiring adaptation. Apply the Serenity Prayer framework. Identify what you can change, what you must accept, and develop wisdom to know the difference. Gradual modification versus complete restructuring provides options for different situations and resource levels. Some external problems can be addressed through incremental improvements that reduce their constraining effects without requiring complete life reorganization, while others may need comprehensive change for meaningful improvement. Systematic action planning for external obstacles breaks overwhelming life changes into manageable steps with specific timelines and success metrics. Career transitions might require education or certification development during evenings and weekends before leaving current employment. Geographic relocations benefit from preliminary visits and community connection building before permanent moves. Support system activation for major life changes recognizes that external weeding often requires community assistance. Identify friends, family members, professionals, or support groups who can provide practical help, emotional encouragement, or accountability during challenging transitions. Most significant life improvements happen more successfully with appropriate support rather than through isolated individual effort. Integration practice. The comprehensive assessment. Effective pruning and weeding requires systematic evaluation of both internal patterns and external circumstances that currently constrain your natural capacity for baseline satisfaction. This integration process creates personalized understanding of which specific obstacles require attention while preventing overwhelming attempts to change everything simultaneously. Monthly internal pattern review involves tracking cognitive and emotional patterns that consistently drain energy from your baseline satisfaction. Notice which mental habits reliably enhance versus diminish your capacity for contentment, resilience, and effective action. Identify your most frequent cognitive distortions by paying attention to their characteristic emotional signatures. Quarterly external circumstance assessment examines major life domains for systematic satisfaction, drains that resist improvement through daily practices and positive mental adjustments. Review work satisfaction, geographic and climate alignment, living situation, functionality, and relationship structure health for their effects on your natural energy and contentment. Annual strategic planning integration combines internal pattern work with external modification planning to create comprehensive approaches that address both psychological and circumstantial obstacles to baseline satisfaction. Assess your current capacity for managing change, including available resources, support systems, and competing demands on attention and energy. Daily compassionate maintenance sustains ongoing attention to pattern recognition and gentle course correction without creating additional pressure or self-criticism. Begin each day with brief intention to notice constraining patterns without judgment. End each day with appreciation for any progress made in internal pattern awareness or external life improvement. Remember that both pruning and weeding serve growth rather than punishment. Each mental pattern you gently redirect and every structural circumstance you thoughtfully improve creates space for expressions of yourself that may have remained dormant for years. The goal involves removing obstacles to your natural capacity for flourishing rather than forcing artificial changes that don't align with your authentic development. Through patient pruning of the thoughts that distort reality and careful weeding of the circumstances that drain vitality, you create optimal conditions for the inherent satisfaction that seeks expression through your unique life. The maintenance work you practice today enables the authentic flourishing that represents your deepest potential for sustained contentment and generous contribution to the world.